everyone, and welcome to this new edition of Business Africa. This week on our show, we will of course speak of business and economy, but we will also talk about mineral processing and local production. How can they enrich Africa, with examples in Guinea and Ghana coming up on the show. In Guinea, the government imposes on the mines the local transformation of bauxite to enrich the country.
Dans le long terme, on veut devenir...
And in the long term, we want to become the world leader in the alumina sector, as we are today in bauxite.
Aujourd'hui dans la bauxite.
Ghana's textile sector relies on tradition to ensure its survival in the face of the threat of imports.
I decided to start the textile business. But it came to a time the Ghanaian print, it was expensive. So people couldn't afford it.
Financing agricultural sectors remains a challenge. In Benin, farmers use a guarantee system to buy their fertilizers.
Before
the project, I got 8 basins. Now, with the inputs, I get more than 20.
In Guinea, a roadmap for the local transformation of bauxite was imposed last year on mining companies. The objective is to allow the country, which holds the world's largest reserves of this ore used for the production of aluminium, to capitalize on its exploitation. But economists and civil society have doubts about the implementation of this government decision. This is a report by Sayon Koroma. Take a look. Guinea has been mining bauxite for 50 years. The country has 1/3 of the world's reserves of this mineral. And every year, Guinea makes a great feat in production, which has risen from 20 million tons in 2016 to 87 million in 2022. A performance achieved thanks to the modernization of production methods. The GAC Guinea Alumina Corporation has, for example, reached a production capacity of 13 million tons in 2021. And the company has big ambitions, exporting 18 million tons of bauxite per year by 2024 is the dream.
C'est un processus de développement continu.
It's a continuous development process. Since 2019, we have improved our production process by training employees and purchasing new equipment.
Par la formation de nos employés, par l'achat de...
Everything I just mentioned has allowed us to increase our production from 2019 to today.
D'augmenter notre production de 2019 à aujourd'hui.
So that together we can all benefit from this project.
For Guineans to benefit fully from these financial windfalls, the subsidiary of the Emirates Global Aluminium Company wants to innovate. One of the company's priorities being the construction of a refinery of an annual capacity of 2.4 million tons.
Oui, c'est dans notre convention de base.
Yes, it's in our basic agreement. We're currently following our retro planning at the state level, so it's on track, and it is being followed.
Le chronogramme est suivi.
The development of this program to build bauxite refineries on site in Guinea is an injunction from the transitional government. Last April, the 10 bauxite companies operating in Guinea were ordered to build alumina processing units. To date, 5 groups of mining companies have formed and submitted their retro-planning.
Les compagnies qui ont pris des engagements vis-à-vis de l'État, on veut vraiment qu'ils...
For the companies that have made commitments with the state, we want them to comply. And His Excellency, the President of the Republic, has already summoned them and asked that each of these companies submit an implementation schedule. This has already been done. So we're analyzing it and also discussing with them to see what synergy we can adopt with these companies to accelerate even further.
Avec ces compagnies pour encore accélérer plus vite les besoins et l'objectif à court terme est...
And the short-term objective is to have at least one extension or creation of a new refinery in Guinea within 3 years.
Ça, c'est vraiment une transformation.
This is a major transformation.
On veut devenir...
And in the long term, we want to become the world leader in the alumina sector, as we are today in bauxite.
By building these refineries, Guinea could quintuple its mining revenues. Bauxite, which brings in $500 million to the Guinean state yearly, could increase to $2.5 billion.
Aujourd'hui, la contribution du secteur extractif.
Today, the extractive sector's contribution, if we take budgetary revenues, is 30.71%. Bauxite constitutes between 60 and 80% of this revenue. So why not transform bauxite into alumina instead of just being a supplier of raw materials to other countries' factories? If bauxite, for example, sells for $30 to $40 a ton, alumina is around $1,500. It is a question of transforming this raw material into a semi-finished or finished product to add value and jobs for young people.
However, the establishment of refineries involves several challenges, notably the control of production factors and the mobilization of capital for investment in an institutionally fragile country.
Dire à une entreprise brusquement, par la thérapie du choc.
Telling a company suddenly by shock therapy, as we say, to produce an investment plan could also increase this risk factor for the company. You see that the incentive to make the investment can or must be made only in a climate of trust. Confidence in the future, in what will be done, in the realization, and also about the sustainability of their investment. If this is not the case, it becomes a constraint that can become a downside.
Also, the establishment of refineries generates extremely high costs, especially for energy. In Guinea, the energy deficit is acute, hence the need for the country to finalize the construction of the Swapiti hydroelectric dam with a capacity of 450 megawatts, in addition to Kalita, which has a capacity of 240 megawatts.
Guinea does not have sufficient energy for domestic consumption, let alone a surplus that can be made available to refineries. The idea of creating refineries in Guinea is realistic, but not in the short term. Realistic in the sense that we have all the potential to set up refineries here. But the country's economic conditions and the conditions for building these refineries require some time. There are other constraints, such as those linked to funding, to local legislations with the state, but also obstacles related to the use of energy.
To obtain operating permits, companies usually promise to build alumina refineries. But 50 years after the first bauxite company was established, the country has only one refinery. Ruzel Frigier's Freya alumina plant in the west of the country, 160 kilometers from the capital Conakry. This plant is the first on African soil. After the Central African Republic, it is the turn of the Republic of Congo to increase the price of fuel by 30 CFA francs for gasoline and 25 CFA francs for diesel. The Congolese government had to fight with the International Monetary Fund, which demanded a higher increase. The organization is concerned about the rise of fuel subsidies granted by African governments and would prefer to see them replaced by social safety nets for the poorest. In several countries, populations are anticipating price increases at the pump. Goodbye Beijing and hello Ankara. Uganda has just cancelled a $2.2 billion contract with Chinese company China Harbour. Instead, a memorandum of understanding was signed with the Turkish firm Yapı Merkezi. It covers the 273-kilometre Malaba-Kampala railway line, Malaba, which is on the border with Kenya. However, the site had recently been described as being well underway, but Uganda has realized that the growing reluctance of Chinese banks towards infrastructure projects in Africa might threaten its completion. For their part, Chinese financial institutions feared that the lack of rail connection from Malaba to Kenya would make the project unviable. It has become a real ecological, economic and cultural issue. Ghana is suffocating under the pressure of tons of textile waste from Western countries. The country, which has a rich history of textile manufacturing, is now fighting on the two fronts of imports of foreign fabrics and second-hand clothing. To succeed in triumphing over these flows, the country chose to bet on tradition and made in Ghana. In 2004, the government even had the idea of establishing Friday as a day to promote local textiles. Hence, the resistance of a sewing sector that is still very much alive. Our journalists John Awotwi and George Ibo-Saki went to meet these exceptional tailors. Take a look. This Friday Wear initiative brought a boost in business for local dressmakers and tailors, as the wearing of wax print fabrics, which was widely deemed as out of place in formal settings, became a more universally accepted style of clothing, bringing a higher value to the production and use of these garments. A move that was intended to revive the local textiles industry, which employed some 3,000 people, a significant fall from some 30,000 in the 70s. But with an increase in demand of the locally produced clothes, following the Friday Wear initiative, local production struggled to meet the supply. This led to a rise in the price of the local fabrics and opened up an avenue for the infiltration of the cheaper imported fabrics or counterfeited fabrics. Sarah Agri was introduced to the textile trade as a child by her grandmother. She currently sells both locally produced textiles and foreign counterfeited fabrics.
I decided to start the textile business, but it came to a time the Ghanaian print, it was expensive, so people couldn't afford it. So I made up my mind to join the high target, that is the foreign ones. And that one too is cheaper. So people started buying that one. And as for the GTP and printers like that soft, when somebody is going to marriage ceremony or funeral, then they buy the GTP because that is a traditional cloth.
GTP, ATL and Printex are actually the name of 3 of the 4 major garment factories that survived the decline of the sector in Ghana in the early 2000s. By extension, they gave their name to locally manufactured fabrics used for ceremonial or customary activities. Wooden, however, is of Francophone origin and has become accepted for contemporary use. These days, African print garments are worn daily in many variations in both formal and informal settings. The dressmakers sometimes cannot keep up with the orders, especially during the periods leading up to festive occasions. Some patrons also have to travel long distances to get their dresses made because of their individual taste and styles. Philomena Appiah regularly has to travel out of town to get her dresses made for her.
I was looking for a reliable person to sew my clothes, but I couldn't get one until my sister introduced someone for me at Salt Pond to go there and sew my dress. So when I go there, I see the woman too is very serious to sew the dress for me. That's why I just traveled from Cape Coast to Salt Pond to get a person to sew my dress.
Artisanal tailors like Emmanuel Young-Colhams, a third-generation tailor and IT student, are all thankful to the family business they can depend on.
My dad took over him, and I've also taken over my dad. One thing that I've learned from my granddad is that whenever he sews dresses for someone, he makes it look unique in a way that he looks at your personality, your stature, and he sews the dress to fit you perfectly.
Ebenezer Ajay Mansa took over his father's once sought-after tailoring shop that specialized in hand-sewn suits, which was on the brink of collapse and has struggled to keep it afloat. But although he produces some fine garments, businesses like his face the threat of being pushed out of operation by yet another obstacle: cheaper, imported second-hand clothing from China, the US and UK has flooded the Ghanaian market, suffocating the local industry.
This shop is my father's shop. He's the one who taught me this work. What I learned from my father, I'm just continuing. At first, we got some pastors, lawyers, big men from the ministries. All the time bring their work here, suit here so that we sew for them. And now things are not like first.
But Professor Asma sees the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, the AfCFTA, as another opportunity to reverse the decline in the clothing and textile industry. The agreement provides a bigger market for our locally produced goods, and he encourages entrepreneurs to get themselves prepared by undergoing skills training and apprenticeship programs.
High time we move away from the job of going to school to work in the bank and to work in the ministries and so on. This sector is a big one. And now that the African Free Trade Area is coming on board, I believe it gives us a huge opportunity now, not only to target the local market, but to target the rest of the African continent. And this is where I see the potential of this industry.
With the estimated steady rise in imports of cheaper, inferior clothes and second-hand clothes into the country from $115 million in 2002 to $250 million in 2019, the trend in the declining fortunes of Ghana's local textile and fashion industry is unlikely to change, reducing the local industry to an artisanal scale in a country that needs to make major interventions in getting the masses of its youth in gainful employment. Welcome to the second part of our show. Ubuntu Health Impact Fund, or the Ubuntu Health Fund. This is the name of the brand new fund dedicated to the emerging African pharmaceutical industry created in Kigali in Rwanda. Ubuntu already has $100 million and expects an envelope of $5 billion over the next 5 years. It specifically targets the financing of innovation and local pharmaceutical production, with a particular emphasis on diseases that affect the continent. Recall that Rwanda is in partnership with the firm BioNTech to establish one of the first African production lines of RNA vaccines. And precisely, Uganda announced the end of the Ebola epidemic, which had caused much concern in recent months. The WHO, the World Health Organization, believes that the early warning and contact tracing system set up by Kampala has given good results. The fact remains that the Sudanese strain of the Ebola virus remains invincible for the moment. Uganda has, however, received 5,000 doses of candidate vaccines that could be deployed to the new outbreak of the disease. And now on a very different topic, French cows are ready to set foot in Africa. After a first successful delivery in 2020, no less than 165 dairy cows of the Montbéliard breed arrived in the very north of Cameroon to begin their adaptation. This French species produces 5 times more milk than its African counterparts, and it adapts well to tropical climates. A new delivery of these cattle was still expected last Sunday. In total, therefore, 495 cows and their offspring will enable the country to gradually fill its milk deficit, estimated at 120,000 tons per year. How to buy inputs, fertilizers or pesticides when the bank is asking for a guarantor. It was mission impossible for these Beninese farmers determined not to settle for mediocre yields for their food crops. They ended up taking the step of the guarantee on stock or warrantage. Our journalist Eric Mounier had visited some of them. Let's find out.
With just 5% of its land currently cultivated, Africa has the planet's greatest potential for agricultural development. Yield per hectare, one of the lowest in the world, could be tripled with the use of products such as fertilizer and pesticide to improve and protect crops. But these inputs are expensive, and few farmers can afford them.
If we don't use inputs for food crops, they cannot reach their full potential, and that affects productivity and the yield. The decrease in agricultural outputs in food crops in the region can even result in food shortages.
One solution is to borrow money to buy the inputs, but with unpredictable climates and fluctuating market rates, the banks are reluctant to lend. For small-scale producers, obtaining loans can be hard work.
They want your birth certificates. Then, you have to have it validated at the town hall. You have to show them your land ownership documents if you have a plot of land. That all costs money. It is exhausting. And in the end, you just give up. They ask you for a guarantor. It's impossible to find someone who will provide guarantees for amounts like these. Then, of course, everybody knows you are applying for a loan.
For 3 years, 600 farmers' organizations in Benin tested a system known as warrantage. This innovative solution helps make loans more easily available and therefore improves access to the inputs the farmers so badly need.
Le mécanisme de warrantage est une technique de crédit.
The warrantage mechanism is a loan system that uses a stock of non-perishable agricultural produce with fluctuating market rates between fat and lean seasons as security for loans.
De prix entre une période d'abondance et une période de soudure.
So how does it work? After the harvest, the farmers store their produce at a time when market rates are low and there's little incentive to sell. This stock is used as security for a banker willing to lend the farmers money. During the lean season, with prices much higher, the farmers sell their produce and pay back the bank. During this time, the farmers have had the money they need to buy inputs and prepare the harvest.
As a rule, we take 2 tons. That is 40 bags of NPK and a ton of urea. That is 3 tons in all.
Profits have doubled for the project's farmers. Yields have increased twofold on average, and harvests are being sold at better prices. In other words, they have sold more produce for more money.
Before the project, I got 8 basins. Now, with the inputs, I get more than 20. Before warrantage, I got 10 bags a hectare at most. Now, with the warrantage system, I have the inputs I need, and I can produce 25 to 26 bags. It has changed my children's education. There's a private school here, and I've been able to enroll 2 of my children.
But the system will only work properly if the produce is stored in facilities that respect specific standards.
This is
the Sekere Maro store in the Sinande commune. These ventilation holes allow the products to breathe. The roof must also be watertight so it doesn't leak during the rainy season. And it must be well ventilated. We are also very careful to respect storage conditions. The produce must be stored on pallets to make sure they are not in direct contact with the ground. If it gets humid, produce that is on the ground can go off very quickly.
It is also important to have significant variations in price between the time of the harvest in January and the lean season in May-June. In recent years, the rates for corn have increased by 30 to 40% on local markets. And yet the system is not foolproof. If the harvest is badly stored, it will go off. Without a harvest to sell, the producer cannot pay back his loan and winds up in debt. There is also the risk that market rates will not rise enough, especially when there's an influx of subsidized produce.
En 2012, on a fait
2012 was a bad year here for Wantage because we had to find money elsewhere to repay our loans. This happened because the market was flooded with government-subsidized rice. We sell rice for $1, but the government was selling it for 50 cents a kilo. People will always buy where things are cheaper.
Despite this setback, Warrantage has been a great success in Benin and has a payback rate of almost 100%. With little investment required and profits after the first year, Warrantage deserves to be better known in Africa. Smallholding farmers across the continent that are trying to improve their living conditions and provide for their families need look no further.
Well, that's it. Business Africa is over for today. I'll see you next week, same time, same channel for Initiative Africa. I will be hosting entrepreneur Nati Ngoy, president of the Inaden Leather Good Line, who will tell us about her journey and her work with Ethiopian craftsmen. In the meantime, you can of course watch the show on our news website, africaonair.com, and follow us on all our social media channels. Feel free to share, like, and comment using the hashtag Business Africa. Take care and see you next week. Goodbye.